All right. Thank you, Sarah. This is going to be a big time shift in gears, although I was thinking a little bit about the connection between the last two talks and mine. We're all about caring for people, right? And my care for people is a little bit different in that I think a lot about workers. And I want to just recognize a couple of collaborators. Hernando Duarte, who is here in the room with me. We work together on a lot of different extension projects and work. Dr. Kate McCoy, who's been a wonderful collaborator with the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, and also Francisco Guerrero with the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy and Service, also known as WIPS. I don't think Francisco's here. We do have a poster downstairs. I also would like to make sure I thank the Dairy Innovation Hub for funding our project here during this particular year. And I'm really going to call this kind of a call for action. And again, my focus is on people, just like our last two speakers, but more on the worker side of things. I'm now seeing the temperature warning thing up at the top. That's not about me. I'm good, actually. So labor is obviously a defining challenge in dairy. We see a huge issue right now. It's one of the top 2 or 3 concerns within our industry. Dairy, obviously, in Wisconsin is a $50 billion industry with a very fragile labor pipeline. At least 70% of our labor in the dairy industry comes from immigrant labor. In some other industries in Wisconsin, for example, row crop production, it might not be quite that much, actually quite a bit less. But in other specialty crops such as cranberry, potato production, we do see a lot of immigrant and migrant workers. There are a lot of policy challenges that we're concerned about. As you all know, I don't need to go into the politics of all that, but bringing a person on board as a new immigrant worker, whether you're from Nicaragua or El Salvador or Mexico, right now is very, very difficult. There is really no year-round alternative for visas, work visas at this point in time. If you're a migrant worker, if you're coming in seasonally, there are some other options. So we do see a big concern. And then the other thing that happens in the state of Wisconsin is we have this structural issue where the overall unemployment rate across the state has been relatively low, hovering at around 3 or 4%. So it is a very competitive marketplace, even out in rural areas where we see many of our farms. Farms are not only competing for labor with themselves, but they're also competing with places like fast food and construction and some of those other kinds of things. Now, this is something that not all of you may know, but farming is increasingly thought of as being dull, dirty, and dangerous, the 3 Ds. And this is a persistent perception that is actually growing as I travel the country. And it's also a global issue. People typically are sort of discouraged from working in agriculture, and especially our youth, especially some of the younger people who perhaps did not grow up on a farm but have that potential to make a living in this industry. And that's something that I find to be sort of sad and discouraging. But I also, in some cases, think that there's some hope based on some of the programs I'm going to talk about. Even immigrant workers increasingly see the dairy industry or agriculture generally as a temporary industry. And it's a workforce issue, but it's also what I'm going to characterize as a safety culture issue. And I'll talk more about that as I go through the presentation. By the way, I didn't mention this at the beginning. I have an affiliate appointment in the School of Medicine and Public Health. So if anybody's interested in the science, the epidemiology, the engineering aspects, the human factors aspects, I'm happy to talk more perhaps during lunch. Epidemiologically speaking, 20.9 fatalities in the ag industry per 100,000 workers. That puts us head and shoulders above all other industries. If you combine mining, construction, manufacturing, transportation, the service industry, the overall death rate is about 3. So you think about farming being roughly 7 times more dangerous. Animal production is right up there at the top, and specifically large animal production, in particular beef and dairy cattle, because of the size of the animals and the types of injuries that can happen. About 20% of Wisconsin farms will have an injury here in 2026. You might think, well, that's not a big deal, little minor injuries. About 80% of those will require some type of medical care or treatment. And the other thing is, with all of these numbers that I'm showing here, we're probably undercounting because we're not necessarily looking at small family farms or people who are self-employed. Beyond the issue of injuries, there are a number of unique health concerns, including zoonotic disease, As many of you probably know, many of the emerging infectious diseases in this country have an animal connection. Think about what we're talking about right now in the news with hantavirus, a direct animal connection. If I work on a dairy farm, I'm also exposed to an array of respiratory hazards, dust, gases, manure pits, silos, grain bins. We also see musculoskeletal strain from repetitive motion and also things like arthritis. So you go on to a modern dairy farm, it might not be as prevalent as it was 10 or 15 years ago, but you see many people who are in their 40s or 50s and definitely into their 60s that are looking at joint replacements, whether it's hips or knees or shoulders. And then we have the whole array of mental health, isolation, heat, language barriers, and a whole bunch of things that also compound with age. So what I would like to say here today, the call to action, it does not have to be this way. If you look at other industries like mining and manufacturing, they have chosen to work aggressively on some of these problems. Farm injuries are predictable and preventable. You might notice I am not using the word accident. If I look up accident in like Webster's dictionary, it's something that happens by chance or fate or an act of God. And what's really important, these things are preventable. There are things we can do about them. So I think we should retire the word accident. Injuries have causes, and if we understand those causes through science, we can prevent. And I think we also need to reshape this narrative of being dull, dirty, and dangerous. You might wonder about the Hordes Dairymen. Just really quickly, this was, I think, 2022. Can farmers match airline safety record? If you had the same fatality rate in commercial aviation, that's like, me flying to Lincoln, Nebraska last week. If you had the same fatality rate in commercial aviation that we do in agriculture, we would have about 17 to 20,000 fatalities per year just from people flying around the country domestically. So our thought, and you're going to see this a little bit in the poster downstairs, Hernando can also talk with you about this, we are working to build a culture of safety. It should be part of our dairy farm's daily values, not just something I do to comply with OSHA, not just a checklist. This begins with leadership, and we feel strongly this is leadership not only within the industry, but also among workers, that we empower workers, that their voices be heard, and that there be shared accountability. I also, as an engineer, I subscribe or really try to align myself with something called the hierarchy of controls. The hierarchy of controls says if we can design a safer work environment, that's going to be far more effective than just simply telling people to not do dumb things or to make sure that they're putting the shields back on. If I'm working in an unsafe environment that is not purposely designed for safety, these injuries are going to happen. Safer workplaces have a strong economic advantage. Culturally, they are better places to work. They're more successful at retaining employees, and they're also going to be more productive. On the right-hand side is, I'm going to talk about a program that Hernando and I have been working on together for about the last year called the Forward Farm Safety Toolkit or Toolbox, and that's kind of the steps within our toolbox. And I think I'll talk about that in just a second. The other thing that I want to just mention, and this goes with our keynote speaker this morning, when we talk about things like AI, machine learning, sensors, automation, some of the really cool stuff that's out there, there is a huge opportunity in the ag industry. We can And it's happening out in places like California. I've traveled into Arizona and other parts of the country where we're able to move people from being farm workers, farm laborers, into technicians, jobs that are enviable. People are seeking out these jobs to do things like help operate robots, to maintain and even produce sensors and AI. Is beginning to reshape the industry here in the dairy industry. Less repetitive labor, more skilled technical work. We have the potential to build better paid, safer, more attractive jobs. And then also, we have the potential to improve safety. If we can replace a person with a robot or some other piece of automated equipment that still needs a human operator, it still needs somebody to be involved with the production, that's potentially a win-win. We're working on a number of projects. I mentioned the Forward Farm Safety Toolbox. This is a bilingual sort of a toolkit. We are thinking about this in terms of workers being able to lead themselves. It's something that's going to be operated and kind of like used at the farm level. Strong foundation in adult education. We have kind of a common framework. I think, Hernando, we will have 17 tools, right, by the end of August, and we've done some very successful piloting with this. The Wellness on Wheels, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this, but Francisco does have the poster downstairs from the WIPS project, 12-week bilingual program that we're developing and we're also evaluating with the help of WIPS. Actually, WIPS is providing all the leadership on this. And again, the second bullet, I just want to again thank the Dairy Innovation Hub. All of this work takes partnerships. I want to just thank again the Wisconsin Department of Health Services. They have been a fantastic partner. I don't think Kate McCoy is here. We work a lot also with DATCAP, the Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection, and specifically, I work with their farm center on issues of farmer and farm worker well-being, including mental health. Again, I mentioned the School of Medicine and Public Health. I don't know how many of you are aware of this. We have kind of a nation-leading a program called the Wisconsin Academy of Rural Medicine. We had a program here sponsored by ASHCA, the Agricultural Safety and Health Council of America, where we focused on dairy workers, and dairy HR back in 2024. And then we're also here in Minnesota blessed to have connections to and relationships with two of our NIOSH, National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. They have agricultural safety and health research centers. So the bottom line on this is that when we think about human health, yes, we're talking about nutrition and all of the great projects that have been talked about in the last roughly 30 minutes. But I think we also need to be thinking about the impact on the people that are milking cows and caring for animals and providing, health for calves and other animals on our farms. Recruitment and retention, in my mind, run through safety. If anybody wants to talk more about the sort of economic benefits, safety should be viewed from a cultural perspective. We do really need to work on thinking about how can we change the safety culture on farms. Partnerships matter. We can't do this alone. We need the public sector, but we also need the private sector to begin to think about and take this issue seriously. A few recommended next steps for you all. Make sure that you do visit our poster downstairs. Check out our Forward Farm Safety Toolkit, and that QR code should take you there. And again, a massive thank you to the Dairy Innovation Hub for supporting our work, and also to all my colleagues. So thank you for being here. I didn't get red carded.
That means we have plenty of time for questions.
Okay.
Any questions?
Yeah, I was wondering, I think safety of the workers and the animals is very important, but what about the chemicals used on the farms that affect the workers, not only the workers, but the animals and the people who consume the food?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we just spent time yesterday talking about chemicals, pesticides, and then also on dairy farms, obviously you've got an array of chemicals used for cleaning and sanitizing and all of those sorts of things. Those are obviously chemicals and substances that have sort of evolved or been developed over time. When I think about the safety aspects, closed handling systems, reducing contact, and the use of personal protective equipment is incredibly important. The bottom line is that this all requires a lot of training, right? And it requires a lot in my mind, training is about communication. It's not just once a year we're going to turn on a video and a DVD and let people watch a video. We're going to talk about this on a weekly basis. If we see things happening, we're not going to call that person out, but we are going to talk about it, and we're not going to feel afraid to bring up when we see hazards or conditions or situations, because in my mind, there's always room for improvement. And if my coworker goes down, guess what? That means double work for me. So thinking about it from a team perspective, and that team being workers plus the actual farm itself.
Other questions?
John, how are you thinking about climate change and the impact on dairy and worker safety?
It's a great question. The impact of heat and climate change and humidity. And a couple years ago, remember the smoke situation that we had? Obviously a big thing if you're an outdoor worker. This is an opportunity, another call for action. It hasn't been talked about a lot, but Dr. Heidi Johnson and I finished about the last couple of months the WICI report. Heidi, remind me what WICI stands for? It's the it's the Wisconsin Climate Change Initiative, and we actually, in our agricultural working report, we do talk and we speak to the impact of heat on workers. Wisconsin is actually one of the few Midwestern states that really has taken it like pretty seriously. We actually have some fairly for the Midwest, some fairly robust heat-related requirements for farm workers. So yeah, it's a great question, and I don't know if we have one of our toolbox modules that will cover heat as one of the different components of that module.
One more question.
Could you say a little bit more about initiatives to improve mental health, because farmers' suicides, workers too, probably, in a work environment where you have a lot of isolation and also access to toxic chemicals and gun, every dairy farm has.
Yeah, great question. I did not plant that question. Interestingly, if you look at suicide rates, the rate of suicides is almost identical to the rate of fatal injuries. It's actually a little bit higher. You mentioned isolation is a huge one. Alcohol use, frankly, just so many things that are out of the farmer's control and the farm workers' control. It's been particularly difficult here the last couple of years. I guess I would throw this back to DATCAP, and also Extension has a number of programs in this space as well. Happy to talk with you more about that, but the DATCAP Farm Center, if anybody knows of a farmer, farm family member who is struggling, they provide financial support for counseling and for therapists, and they also have a hotline that's 24/7. So if a person is feeling, really struggling, depressed, suicidal, there are lots of resources out there to help. And the big one's 988. That's the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, and they also do a great job. Thank you.